Hello, you are live.
How are you guys? Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor and a privilege to be speaking to everyone here at the summit. I hope everyone's having fun. I got my Starbucks gift card. I used it. No more pumpkin spice lattes. That's out of fashion. But thank you for giving me some fuel for the day, and I'm so excited to share some perspective with you guys about what it's like to present customer success inside of a boardroom. So I'm going to click share and I will trust all of this works. Okay. So quick background on myself. I'm Vas. I am a partner at Accel. I've been here for about 12 years now. I invest in a bunch of different early stage seed and series A businesses in and around enterprise software and collaboration tooling, data and analytics. Was the first investor at companies like Segment, which is in the customer data space. Hope there are a lot of Segment customers out there. Investor in a company called Frame.io, which was interestingly an early Catalyst customer. Frame was just acquired by Adobe back in October. So nice win for the New York tech ecosystem. I'm a huge customer success believer. I'll talk a little bit about my journey as an investor and how customer success has become so important in the boardroom. And I am an admittedly biased Catalyst cheerleader. So I had the great fortune and honor of leading the Series A in Catalyst back in 2019. Have been on the board ever since, and have just been so proud and excited by all the progress that we've made as a company. Really helping to advance the field and the best practices around customer success. So excited to be here again. Thank you for having me. Having peeked in a couple times throughout the day, there's been some awesome content the whole day, and so I want to lower your expectations as you come up to me. Okay. So the title of this presentation is CS in the Boardroom: How to Be Awesome. My goal today is for everyone who is a CS leader, who is having boardroom conversations. I want you to have really great actionable feedback from today. I want you to feel like you can go and edit your board slides that you're presenting for Q1 or for the end of Q4 and have the right rigor and structure and be totally prepared as you're entering those conversations. Or if you're a future head of CS, maybe you're a CS IC right now, or you're a manager of a small CS pod. Hopefully you endeavor to be leading your function at some point, and you will have to have board conversations. And so I want to equip you with the right content that you're going to need to go in and have those conversations with folks like us. And then, for anyone who didn't leave in time, you can put me on mute. I hope this is at least somewhat visually interesting, but I really want to make sure that you get a lot out of today, because the conversation between the CS leader and the board room has become such a consequential one. So no surprise, CS is all over the boardroom today. I took a quick measure of all of our board agendas for any of the board meetings I've done in the last 6 months. So we have them all organized in Dropbox, and if I actually went through and I looked at the amount of airtime that was given to customer success across those board agendas, it was about 30 to 35%. So that is a really consequential, significant percentage of some of the most critical company conversations that we're having throughout the year. 30% of one of the most important business conversations we have throughout the year is actually dedicated to customer success. So kudos to CS, its importance. Kudos to all of you. CS has over time more than earned its seat at the table, quote unquote. And in fact, it's probably one of the sections in board conversations that I look forward to the most. That wasn't always the case, admittedly. I remember investing, I started my career back in 2007. I was at another venture firm called Insight. We were doing software technology investing, and all the businesses we invested in back then were license maintenance software businesses. And I don't know what the median age is of our attendees today, but most of you, I would gather, grew up native to the SaaS generation. So it was all about recurring revenue. But lo and behold, there was another model that actually predated you, and it was called license maintenance software businesses. And it was really interesting. You would build a software product, you would sell it once to a customer, you would get 80 to 90% of your lifetime value economics upfront in that first year deal. And, maybe you would tack on 15 to 20% in recurring maintenance, but you earned all of your customer value upfront. And I'll always remember the first real SaaS board I was on in 2009, 2010 was the first time I'd ever heard of the concept of net dollar retention. Prior to that, no one had really been talking about what it meant to create long-term customer lifetime value by delivering a recurring service to your end customers. And the economics of SaaS obviously shifted so significantly, where a small percentage of the lifetime value you were earning as a company was actually earned in that first year. The vast majority of the lifetime value was earned in year two, three, four, five, and six. And so, this represented a meaningful shift for these boards. We had to suddenly wrap our arms and our minds around, in terms of business models, what this meant in terms of how quickly we and organizationally, we had to reorient ourselves and our companies to put the systems and the processes in place to support what was ultimately, this practice of customer success. But needless to say, customer success is still in its infancy. Is sort of the point I'm trying to make. It's only been 8 to 10 years of defining customer success and building best practices. And I'm so excited for obviously the role that companies like Catalyst are playing in terms of building the institutional knowledge around how to do CS really well. Um, the concept of net dollar retention. So, I mentioned NDR was suddenly entering the board vernacular. Um, and lo and behold, it's actually become one of the most critical concepts that all of our companies can be focused on. And the group of people that are the uh, ultimate arbiters of company value, the public market investors. So, we invest in private companies and we ultimately hope to take those companies public at some point. And so we are, theoretically handing our shares to someone else. And those people that we hand our shares to have all unequivocally spoken. They have all said the thing that they value the most as they look at and assign valuations to companies is net dollar retention. So all of the work that this community does to drive net dollar retention in its companies, investors would say is the most critical input to company value. So that's pretty cool. Again, 8 to 10 years ago, when it was all license maintenance software businesses, we really focused on just the sales teams and the initial bookings that they were generating and the average ACVs. But now investors have said the best, highest valued companies are all going to have the highest net dollar retention. That's not to say other things don't matter. Growth rate matters, gross margin matters, profitability matters. Those are all explanatory variables as it relates to company value. But the number one input to company value statistically is net dollar retention. So that is really cool. That is the work that is being driven by this community. It actually ends up paying off in terms of aggregate company value. So you can understand selfishly as an investor whose end goal is ultimately to help build companies and make them more valuable over time. You can understand why customer success has become so critical in the boardroom. I would just, very quickly tease my posit, which is to say, I think the next CEOs actually are going to come from customer success. And it's because customer success, to me, captures the most holistic view of a company and its customers. You not only think about how we bring customers into the fold and how we onboard customers, you think about how we deliver recurring value to them, how we retain them, how we expand them. That is a 360-degree view of how a company delivers value to customers. And it is, there is no other function in the organization that has such a holistic, all-encompassing view. And I have just always found that the best CEOs of technology businesses are the most customer-centric. And the best way to be customer centric, I think, is to live and grow up in CS. And so I think the future CEOs, the future founders, hopefully are going to come from this room, this forum, and I'm excited to see um, how this community grows and supports its next generation of founders over time. So now getting to the meat of the presentation. So you are presenting to the board, and uh, as a consumer of customer success presentations, I've been on 18 boards historically. I'm on 12 boards today. I've probably was just doing a rough count. I've had 36 different heads of customer success present in Accel board meetings. So I've just been the consumer of so many different presentations. And what I want to leave you with today is what I think separates good from great. To me, as an investor, there are four things that I want to take away from a great customer success presentation. One is looking back, I want to understand the clearly articulated metrics of the CS function and how they align to company strategy. So, one of the pitfalls I often see of CS leaders who are just getting out and presenting to the board is um, they talk about CS as a function, operating within a vacuum. And what's really important in the board conversation is that we're connecting the dots to how we're creating value as a company. And so, we'll click into this as it relates to the metrics that we like to see, but it's just really important to maintain that context. It's not just CS as its own autonomous unit. It's how is CS supporting the aggregate goals of the business? That's super, super important. Second, and I think we've talked about this throughout the day, CS to me is the ultimate voice of the customer. Um, Product teams are meant to capture and synthesize requirements from the customer. And historically, they have been um, the best source of customer input. But increasingly, I think the most current active voice of the customer actually flows in through customer success. So, to me as a board member, when I want raw, on the ground data about how we're delivering value to our customers, I want to hear from CS. And so, it's just so important to structure um, some time as part of your presentation to inject the voice of the customer into that boardroom. So, first two things looking back are metrics and business goals. And we're going to click into those, and then voice of the customer. So, what have we been hearing from our customers? Next, looking forward, we want to know that you have great plans for how we're going to scale customer success over time. And so that's everything from our headcount plan, how that connects to the right coverage ratios vis-a-vis CSMs relative to accounts. We'd love to understand your plans for automation as well. What are other things that we can do to build leverage into the CS function so that, as we are scaling the company over time, we don't necessarily have to linearly scale our CS function as well. And this is all about being a leader of the business. How we're going to be creating value in the company if we're creating leverage in the CS function. And so, one of the pitfalls sometimes you see again with CS leaders who are just starting to present is, they almost they present their plans as if it's a bit of a fiefdom, and we're going to scale CS into perpetuity and add lots of headcount and lots of process and um, how do you actually step back and think about how we're going to elegantly scale customer success and how we can um, start to remove more humans from the equation over time so that again we're building more leverage into the system. So again, four things we look for: looking back, metrics and business goals; voice of the customer; looking forward, what is the right headcount plan, how are we growing the organization, and then more importantly, how are we building leverage into the CS function over time. The ultimate test, and this is super important to take away from this presentation, is to know what the board is for. And the board is a sounding board for the CEO to help him or her know that they have the right lieutenants in the right seats. So, just to make it very tangible for you, at the end of every Catalyst board meeting, for example, Ed, myself, and the other board members, we get together and we talk about all the functional leaders that presented in that board meeting. And, we have the benefit of having been board members across so many different types of companies. We have seen and consumed, again, so many sales presentations, product presentations, customer success presentations. And it's that breadth of data that we have that we can bring to bear to help Ed, our CEO, know, hey, you have excellence in the seat of your head of marketing and your head of CS and your head of product and your head of engineering. And so you as a CS leader, when you're presenting in that board meeting, the outcome you want to create is giving this audience, these investors and the execs that are in that meeting, you want to give us extreme faith. You want to leave us with a high degree of confidence that you are on top of the function, you have a handle on the key levers and the inputs. And, again, we're only projecting out over the next 2 to 3 years, but over the next 2 to 3 years, that the function of customer success is capably in your hands. And hopefully through this presentation, we'll help you put together the substance for how to create that faith, to give your board assurance that you're the right leader to take this function forward for the foreseeable future. So again, 4 things we want to know. First is the clear metrics and goals. And I would really encourage you to, every company is different, but I love a metrics dense or metrics forward set of 6 to 10 slides with your own qualitative voiceover. First, looking back. So what was gross retention in the quarter? What was NDR? I love when our heads of CS break that out by segment, because as you know, retention looks different based on the type of customer you're serving, whether it's an SMB or an SMB customer, a mid-market customer, an enterprise customer. So having the student's mind to even break apart some of these high-level key metrics and starting to present different ways of looking at the proverbial Rubik's Cube is always super helpful. This next section I love, which is a churn analysis. So how do we diagnose all of the churn since the last time we met by reason? What were the top accounts that churned? Did they churn for product reasons? Did they churn because we had reliability issues? Was the product too complex? Did we actually oversell that customer from sales? I noticed in the chat, folks were talking about the handoff between sales and CS, and I think that's a really vexing and complex issue. And so, hey, do we need to actually tune who marketing and sales are targeting in terms of new prospects so that we can be successful as a CS org? I love going really, really deep on the churn analysis and, again, breaking that apart on a couple of different dimensions. This is a great time to inject voice of the customer. Again, so what are we hearing from our churned accounts? What are they telling us are the feature gaps that we still haven't filled in? What are they telling us about the competitive environment? Maybe who do they churn to? These are all super interesting nuggets that I think the board really loves to learn. This is also a great opportunity to show how you are actually setting up the systems and the processes to tag this data. So a lot of times, first-time CS leaders are presenting without the requisite data in their hands. And it's just super important to make sure that your CS leaders are tagging their accounts with the requisite churn lost analysis data so that we can have this sort of rich composite view on what happened the previous quarter. So those are some of the key results, right? Gross retention, net dollar retention, breaking that out by segment, churn analysis, breaking that out by reason, and starting to sort of diagnose some of the key issues. Then I love talking about, again, within the guise of looking back, some of the key drivers behind our CS function. So time to value, launch time. How have you established maybe a time to value benchmark for your CS team? Has our CS team identified what the golden moment is for a new customer as it relates to getting enduring value from our product? So, hey, maybe the golden moment for an account is getting 5 users on board with 20 accounts under management and 10 notes loaded with 5 files uploaded. Just sort of a crass view on what a typical SaaS company might look for in terms of engagement. So what is that time to value? How quickly can we get accounts to that golden moment? And maybe what percentage of our accounts are reaching that golden moment within the prescribed amount of time? That connects very deeply to some of our core usage and adoption metrics. So what are the metrics that you guys care about tracking, and what are the systems and processes and playbooks that we're implementing to drive those usage and adoption metrics? That's super important. And then ultimately, as a board member, I want to know that our CS leader is building the CS team. I don't expect our CS leader to do CS. I expect him or her to build the engine to do CS. And so that means, how are we hiring? How are we training? How are we promoting uh, CSMs? How quickly are CSMs actually ramping up to a level of productivity? How many open recs do you have for CSMs? How are you going out and filling those recs? Have you already spun up the requisite job descriptions to hand off to the maybe talent manager or the talent sourcer? How many people do we have interviewed, um, so that we're hitting our hiring goals going forward? So these are all, having a student's mind of the algebra behind the CS function, and being able to express that to the board, again, is all in service of giving your board members a lot of assurance and faith that you are on top of the key levers of what drives this function. So that's all looking back. And I'd say, that's sort of 4 to 5 slides of looking back. And then looking ahead, it's really important that our CS leaders are able to sort of prognosticate and forecast out what they expect to happen, because they have such an intuitive sense of what's happening on the ground. Can you project out what some of our key accounts are actually at risk, because you understand which accounts haven't gotten to that golden moment or aren't actually tracking relative to the adoption metrics that we'd expect of them. And so let's list those out and actually talk about what our remediation plan is for each of those key accounts. Can you forecast ahead to what gross retention and net dollar retention is going to be? My measure of a really great sales leader is a sales leader who's able to forecast their new bookings within 5 to 10% of plan. Similarly, we want to know that a great customer success leader is able to forecast within 5 to 10% of their gross and net dollar retention numbers for the following quarter. Onboarding time, how is that trending relative to plan? What goal have we set for onboarding time and some of the usage and adoption metrics? And given where we are today in this quarter and given where we want to be in the next quarter, how are we going to fill those gaps? And then again, team and headcount planning. This is sort of back to our point about, how are you building the engine to implement CS? Well, what does the team need to look like going forward over the next 12 months? And how are we going out and filling those seats with really excellent CSMs? This concept of customer retention cost, I think, is a new metric that has only just now bubbled up. And I think it's an important metric to be tracking. I don't have the perfect benchmark for what great customer retention cost is. I've seen it roughly calculated as, all of the fully burdened customer success teams cost in terms of team, programs, processes, and technologies. If you're to bucket all of that together and actually divide by your total number of active accounts under management, that gives you sort of a rough sense of what customer retention cost is on a per account basis. And, is that number going up or down over time? Ideally, it's at least staying steady, because again, back to our earlier point, we want to be building leverage into the model. We want to be getting better at customer retention over time. And so hopefully we are spreading fewer and fewer resources out over more and more accounts. That's the definition of leverage. So tracking what customer retention cost is, and more than anything, this showcases that the CS leader has a great handle on not just the top line of what drives their business, but also the bottom line of what drives their business. So those are both equally important. We're trying to create value, but we also understand the cost that's associated with creating that value. And again, connecting to the higher level business goals of the company, it's always great to know that a CS leader understands the income statement or the P&L of their specific function. So again, looking forward, headcount planning, coverage ratios. We talked a little bit about this. How are we investing for scale? Ideas for automation. Ideas for how customers are going to self-serve and self-succeed over time. Not all accounts should be receiving very specific CS attention. And again, this is actually one of the failure patterns you often see is all accounts are getting CSM attention. Well, as we know, that's not going to scale. Early days, it's nice for all accounts as we're sort of building the early portfolio of customers, and we're hoping that everyone is getting to that point of success and that point of indispensability. Sure, or early days, maybe everyone is getting some partial attention from CS, but over time, you want to know that, hey, we're segmenting our accounts based on who's getting specific CSM attention versus who is not. And again, having plans and systems and ideas in place for thinking about how that scales over time. And then again, I can't emphasize this enough, but injecting the voice of the customer into the conversation. We as a board lean on our CS leaders to give us the real-time, up-to-the-minute content and feedback from how our customers are getting value from our products. And so, the more you can overlay those quantitative slides with qualitative customer case studies, walking through all of the key accounts and how they're trending with our product over time, that is super, super valuable content that arguably we don't get from, other presentations throughout our board meetings. So use that moment to really, not only represent the voice of the customer, but to advocate for the customer. Because, at the end of that board meeting, to hear that there are maybe product gaps that our customers are still waiting on gives us the fuel to be able to say, well, hey, why don't we actually allocate more resources to product and engineering so that we can fill the product gap that CS is hearing? Or, hey, maybe our customer accounts aren't the right types of accounts that we can actually make successful. Okay, well, so then how do we get marketing and sales reoriented around the right segments of the market so that we're actually handing off the right accounts to CS that can be successful in the future? These are the types of strategic discussions and strategic decisions that are so important to the company that we can only make if CS is injecting the voice of the customer and advocating for the customer in that boardroom. So, by all means, please make sure that you're bringing that content in. And then at the end of the day, it's about moving success to the center of the company. I am such a big believer in the mission of Catalyst and all the other folks that live and breathe customer success. The best companies, the most valuable companies, have CS as an infectious attitude that has taken over all parts of the company. And I hope that everyone in this room and everyone in our ecosystem is continuing to drive that point forward. CS isn't customer success, or the success of a customer isn't just the sole responsibility of CS. It is a company-wide responsibility. And our best CS leaders are always advocating for that position across their organizations. And so I'm a big believer in CS, and I can't wait to hopefully get a chance to work with many more of you guys across many more Accel portfolio companies in the future. So thank you guys so much for having me.
I'm sorry, you probably saw me try to jump in before. We were having so many burning questions from the audience, and some were really great. So I wanted to make sure that we got to them. So if you don't mind sticking around a couple more minutes, we can get in. So one was from, I'm not sure if it's Karen or Corinne, but essentially her question is, if the, sorry, wrong one, I'm highlighting there. Here we go. If CS isn't getting a lot of time, of airtime in the board meetings, what advice can you give to those CS leaders to try and get that buy-in from the board so that they're more interested and they're able to get the airtime that they deserve?
I think that's a great question. One, I would hope that your leadership teams and your boards are actually actively pulling you in. I think great boards and great leadership teams by default have that posture. CS isn't just about churn. It's about ongoing customer health. It's about expanding those customers over time. One of the big sources of value for CS is, stepping back, when we look at our operating plans for the companies, a lot of how we add business in the next year is going to be the new customers that we go out and win. But an increasingly significant percentage of how we add business in the next year is how our existing customers are going to expand. And I think, if it hasn't already happened, over time, your organization is not just fighting churn, it's actually going to be a meaningful contributor to the top line revenue. And so as a result, your company should be actively resourcing and elevating the voice of CS in the business, because how the company is going to grow is going to be increasingly a function of how you perform your job. So, sorry, that may not be a super satisfying answer, but to me, it's not just about churn. It's about how we're hitting goals going forward. And it's about the voice of the customer. And I think increasingly that comes from CS. And so, have that conversation with your CEO. Get involved with, maybe the other CS leaders in your investors' portfolio and start to network with them. And I think over time, if it has not happened already, over time, it's hopefully it'll naturally get there.
Awesome. A couple more for you. From Kevin, what percentage of the total revenue do you expect to be covered by high versus low touch models versus tech touch? What kind of splits do top companies have between enterprise, majors, mid-market versus SMB?
So, I'd say this is very much a moving target. And I think it depends on the type of product that you're selling and who you're selling that to. So, for example, a developer-centric, low-touch PLG type SaaS business is going to be very low touch and have very little CSM attention. Whereas, maybe a marketing-related tool for a less technically sophisticated audience, maybe even at low ACVs of 1 to 10K, maybe you will assign partial CSM attention to that. So I think I actually think there is no right prescriptive benchmark industry-wide. I would just say that finding benchmarks from fellow CSMs in your industry is super important. One of the pitfalls I keep seeing is I see these aggregated benchmarks that sort of encompass all different types of SaaS companies, and that's absolutely the wrong data to be looking at. You have to look at data vis-a-vis your industry and vis-a-vis the type of product that you're selling against the type of user that you're selling it to. But I'd say as a CS leader presenting in the boardroom, again, I double click on the point that presenting the segmented view of different types of account and different types of CS attention is a really great and deliberate way of showing that you're on top of it and starting to project forward the types of accounts that will be low touch versus higher touch. I think, again, it's just a way of showcasing to your board that you are actively trying to build leverage in the model.
Amazing. Okay, I have one final question to end us on. I remember a while back you said that the future CROs or the future CEOs are going to come from CS, and we're talking about sort of the future of that. We have a sort of a similar question, but about future CS leaders. So there were a couple of folks talking about this in the chat. The original question was, given that a CS leader doesn't need to do CS, but rather, they're supposed to build the machine, guide the philosophy, so do they need to spend time rising up through the ranks from CSM, senior CSM director, et cetera? And then sort of the second layer that someone was asking about that question was, will CS leaders even necessarily come from CS backgrounds at all, given the growing emphasis on things like revenue operations and CS ops and sales ops? Do you think that more CS leaders are going to start coming from backgrounds beyond I was a CSM that got promoted X amount of times?
I think that's a really great question. The CS function, I think, is increasingly becoming a very holistic function, and SaaS businesses are almost like little mini supply chains where you are having to acquire customers, onboard customers, make them successful, retain customers, expand customers, upsell customers. That supply chain, in the best companies, fuses together really well. And I would say our best CEOs, for sure, and I'd put Edward in this bucket as an example, the shout out to Edward, are able to hold the entirety of that equation in their head. And so whether you have direct experience with each of those functions, may matter less than do you have respect for each of those functions, and are you able to tie them together in a really coherent way and build bridges across the organization. Again, I want to emphasize one of the failures that I see in young CS leaders is that are presenting to the board is, it's easy to present CS as its own fiefdom, as its own independent siloed function. But if SaaS is to win, if the company is to win in delivering value to its customers, all of the disparate parts of the organization's marketing, product, engineering, support, CS, all have to cohere really cleanly. And so don't be a fiefdom builder, be a bridge builder. And if you're a bridge builder and you honor the role of everyone else in the organization, and you can hold all the different parts of the equation in your head at once, I think you're setting yourself up to be a really great long-term executive.
I love it. Couldn't think of a better quote to end things on. So Vas, thank you so much for joining us today. That was fantastic.
Thank you guys so much.